You know, in the book of 1 Timothy, the 4th chapter, we find where the Apostle Paul is writing the young evangelist. And he is encouraging, exhorting him to do the things that are right. And in verse 12, he says, "Let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers." In other words, you need to stand out. You need to be something that other people look at instead of you looking at other people all the time. So be an example of the believers. You do it in word, you do it in conversation, you do it in charity, you do it in spirit, you do it in faith, you do it in purity. Now you tell me what's left out. Can you imagine Timothy reading that and then thinking about the world in which he lived and thinking, that's hard. Well, we look at that, and of course God told us that living for him was hard. But I don't care whether you're young, whether you're old, you look at what God says, what we just sang about. Trust and obey. Do those things. Live that life. And we look and we say, it's so hard. And then we get to the point that you don't understand what I'm going through. You don't know what it is to be around the people you don't know what it is to do things that you're talking about where I live, the people I'm around. You know how I know that's true? Because I can hear the echo of those words to my dad. Whatever my father would tell me, son, you need to be a man and live for yourself. You don't just follow what everybody else is doing. You do what's right. Dad, you don't know what it is. Well, he did know. You know, there's a principle in the Bible, 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 12, that you need to take heed to yourself. In other words, I need to realize my responsibility to do what is right, or else I will fall. If I think I'm beyond that, I can engage in these things, I can do that, but I'm not going to go over there all the way. Let him that thinketh he standeth take heed lest he fall. And then, nobody knows what I'm going through. God says, you know, the things that you're going through, they're common to all men. My dad knew exactly what I was going through because he'd gone through the same thing whenever he was a young man. Paul knew what it was to go through these things because he'd faced them whenever he was a young man. Timothy, whenever no doubt he taught these things, he knew what it was when he told others. We need to realize that, yeah, other people know, but especially God knows. He knows exactly what you and I are going through, no matter what age we are. But we need to realize we need to be an example of purity. Now, I think about our young folk. You know, Daniel, I appreciated his prayer. He talked about the men who led, the women who taught Bible class. You know, everybody's got something to do. That's how the church functions. Ephesians, the 4th chapter, in verse 16. That which every joint supplies. And we need to realize that every one of us is going to face struggles whenever we make that decision to be part of the congregation, to live that life, to let our light shine. And we need to realize that there are going to be dangers that face every one of us. But we need to realize God knows what we're going through. We're filled with a room of examples here, but the scriptures are filled with examples also. The one I want to look to tonight, I think is especially timely for young folk. If you've been following along in the daily Bible reading, you've been reading last week about things happened to Joseph. This week you're going to read about things happened to Joseph. And Joseph was a man who faced so much, and yet he's a shining example. How can that be? Well, let's look and see. First of all, you look and you see a picture of Joseph's struggles. In other words, whenever I get on the pity wagon, which I've been there, it's a rough ride. It's easy at first because it's not my fault, it's everybody else's fault doing this and that. Well, you look and you read about Joseph, you read about many others, you see many others around you. But you look, for example, in Genesis, the 37th chapter, in verse 8 through 11. Here, he had a dream, and actually two dreams. And the result of it was, instead of him being able to talk to a family, talk to people and such, and get some encouragement, what does this mean? Had a dream about the sheaves. They bowed down. Had a dream about the sun, moon, and stars. They paid obeisance. We talked about that last week. Well, you look at it, and instead of getting any type of encouragement, any type of help, any type of, wonder what this means, he was mocked by his brothers and his father. You try and tell people what your life's about, people mock you. In Genesis, the 37th chapter, in verse 18 through 28, his brothers sold him. We realize when he was in that pit, he heard his brothers talking about, we're going to kill him. But then they ended up selling him. So now he's deserted by those who ought to love him. He is facing the struggles. He's all alone. And then in chapter 37, he's sold into Potiphar's house. Strange place. Away from family. Now, you look and you find that in verse 1 through 6 of chapter 39, he prospers. But the beginning likely wasn't that way. Here he is. I'm all alone. My family's deserted me. They sold me to these people. These people sold me into this slavery, and now I'm here. What am I going to do? Well, it turns out for good. He is over all the house, so everything is working great. Then Potiphar's wife, come here, lie with me. He says, no. Come on, lie with me. He was tempted. That's the lust of flesh, the lust of the eyes, the lust of the pride of life. Here it is. This woman is telling this young man, come on. And yet he overcomes it. And then she lies about what happens. So here he is, things, okay, they're working a little better. I'm in Potiphar's house, I'm okay. She lies, he ends up in jail. He's in prison now. I think I've got it hard at times. And you think about, here is a teenager who has all of this happened. He's cast into prison. Well, ultimately, he gets out of that. But you look at all of those things and you picture the struggles. And how many times have you young folk done that? I look and my heart breaks. The writer in Ecclesiastes said in Ecclesiastes 1 and verse 9, there's nothing new under the sun. But I realize, I looked at my children as they grew up, and I'm sure they thought, you're old-fashioned, you don't know what I'm going through, you don't know what I face. Yeah, I knew what they did. And it broke my heart to realize they were going to face it. And I could do everything I could, but ultimately they had to make the decisions because I wasn't going to be in school with them. They had to make decisions. I look at my grandchildren, your children, your grandchildren. I look at you at work. In your family members that are not following God, the society we live in. It's heartbreaking to realize how so much comes against us and how many people mock you if you want to do what's right. And it's so hard to take that stand. People lie about you. You suffer the consequences of falsehood. Happens to everybody. You think about what was working against Joseph as he had these struggles. First of all, he's young. Well, age is a problem. I don't care what age you are. Whenever you're young, you're too young, you don't know anything. You're trying to take a stand, you're trying to do what's right. Okay, you get on. You just don't understand. Then you get up the between age. Well, you just think you know it all. Then you get older. Yeah, you're old. You don't understand anything. You've probably forgotten everything. So I don't care what age you are. Age can be a detriment, but it was a detriment to this young man. And bad treatment? Nobody cares. You're at work, you're at school, you're amongst your ungodly neighbors. You're trying to do what's right. They don't care. You look and you think, what's it worth? Why is it that I can do that? And then the examples, the peer pressure that was there. Can you imagine all the pressure that Joseph had? Whether it was in Potiphar's house or whether it was in the prison, whether it was his brother, just join in with us and quit all this foolishness. Don't think you're exalted. That's what his brothers would tell him. Don't think you're better than us. Can you imagine a young man who was a slave being put in charge in Potiphar's house? When he went in, which I've got some questions about him going in after Potiphar's wife had tempted him, the wisdom that he showed in going in when none other than men servants were there. But can you imagine how they would have mocked him? I mean, it happens to all of us, doesn't it? You mock because you want to do what's right. The example, the peer pressure is just join with us. Fit in, would you? And in the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life. You know, I've had people tell me, well, you know, I'm never tempted by this stuff out there. I think, you know, you're either a liar or you're safe because you're not mentally competent. Because God says every one of us is tempted in James 1. And if we give in to that lust, sin comes forth. It's our choice what to do with it. But if we play like it's not a problem, what planet are you living on? You look and you find this is there. It's something that he struggled with and we struggle with. Sorrow. So many bad things happen in my life. If God really cared about me, why should I care about him? This happened. Can you imagine Joseph? I mean, here, I have a dream. Obviously, he thought that was from God, I believe. I'm going to be the one my brothers bow down to, my parents even. And now, he's lost all of that. He's taken out of his home. You ever had that sorrow? You ever had that discouragement? You see, the point is, you look at Joseph and you think, all of these happened to him. Then you think, you know, God's telling the truth. The things that you and I face, they're common to all men. But then you think about it. If Joseph, you think about the results. What happens if you give in? Now, I've talked about before, in the book of Genesis, chapter 3 and verse 15, God gave a promise. He said, the seed of woman, it's going to deliver the death blow to Satan. We have an in-between there. Everything in between. What would have happened if Joseph would have said, it's too hard. This is too tempting. So he lied with Potiphar's wife. Or he went about it instead of, you know, trying to help his family when they came to Egypt because of the famine, he decided he's going to kill them guys after what they did to him. God's purpose would have gone on. I don't know how, but God doesn't lie. So his purpose is going to go on. But I'm thankful I read about Joseph that as he faced all of this, he didn't succumb to them. But think about what if you and I succumb to that. You start with the young folk. What happens if we give in to sin? Makes life easier, right? No. Have you ever talked to somebody? You know, take for example the temptations about, like this young man was faced with, the temptation of giving in to sexual activity. You ever looked at statistics as to what's going on? You ever looked at what types of diseases are passed on? The effects that they have? A moment of weakness can result in a lifetime of struggles physically because of the result of the disease you get. Everybody think, what's one time not going to happen to me? Well, number one, it can happen one time. Number two, you have one time with somebody, you in essence have a one time with everybody they've been with before. So this one time, number one, it's still sin. Number two, the physical consequences of that. But you look at it and you see that young people between the ages of 15 to 24 account for 50% of all of the new sexually transmitted diseases. That's horrible. But it won't happen to me. Well, that's what those 50% thought, no doubt. 46% of American high school students have had sexual activity or at risk for HIV or other STDs. The rates of various diseases, you can look them up. The annual number of new infections is among teen girls about 51% and teen boys about 49%. HPV, human papillovirus, which they've got injections you get to hopefully prevent that. They're the majority of the prevalent diseases. 6 in 10 active high school teens reported using some kind of means to help prevent disease. That means 40% don't even think ahead. Of course, you look at that, and that's a result of that. What about drugs? I'm just going to take this little, and I feel so sorry for the world in which our young people are coming up. You know, it's okay. A little marijuana. Well, marijuana's not legal in Missouri. But you can go someplace, get a doctor on site anywhere, in case you have a medical need for marijuana. Anybody going to guess what's going to happen when you go in and give them your symptoms? Well, marijuana's not serious. I heard a study the other day, I was talking to Lana about it. The increased suicide rate amongst young people who are using marijuana. What about marijuana use and how it dulls the senses, dulls your abilities? You want to get to be 16 years old and driving several thousand pounds of a piece of metal down the road and your senses dull? What about the other drugs and the ability for them to take hold of you? You ever seen anybody? Talk to Lana sometime. She can tell you about the people whom she comes into contact with. And you can identify the users of methamphetamines. You know, usually as they get more and more addicted, you find that teeth are gone. You find all sorts of physical effects from it. And then you get the opioid users. And if you've ever seen anybody trying to come off of that, and by the way, talk to some of the medical practitioners. Some people get addicted to opioids right on. It's not going to happen to me, of course, because that's always somebody else. Cocaine? Ask the doctors how many people they've seen with a septum missing in their nose because of snorting cocaine. I mean, you go on with all the drugs, but then you get the addictive nature of it. Sometimes study the crime rate, what people will do in order to get the next little bit of drugs. But you know, I'm not like these people down here on Independence Avenue. They're going along, they're gaunt, you can see all of the tracks on their arm, and I'm not that kind of person. If you're addicted, you're addicted. You have let something else take hold of your life. You have let something take you and control you. And if you've ever seen anybody that's addicted, not even to mention what the effects of the drugs are themselves, but the addictive nature, what they will do, they will lie, steal, cheat, kill in order to get what they want. Why? Because they gave in the first time. You know how to not become addicted to these things? Don't take the first one. Have the boldness to stand up. And no matter what somebody says, I don't care whether you're 10 years old or whether you're 90 years old and somebody tempts you with something, have the courage to say, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not that kind of person. Have the boldness to take a stand for yourself, to be an example of the believers in word and conversation and charity and spirit and faith, in purity. You can do it. Every one of us can do it. You think about that. You think of Joseph. You go back to him and you think, what is it that Joseph was able to do that I can learn from? As you see all the temptations he had from the time he was in his father's house and his brothers starting to sit there, he said, can't even speak peacefully, can't even talk to that guy. And then they got worse and worse and worse in the way they acted to him, finally decided to kill him, and ultimately Reuben was able to hopefully dissuade them a bit by the things he said, which he should have said a lot earlier, but then they sell him. How is it that all of that and the events that happened in Potiphar's house after that, in the prison after that, how is it that he remained pure? You look, Genesis the 39th chapter. You find chapter 39, in verse 7, it came to pass that after these things the master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph and said, lie with me. He refused. Said unto his master's wife, behold, my master knoweth not what is with me in the house. He hath committed all that he hath unto my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither has he kept back anything from me but thee, because thou art his wife. How can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? You see, we have the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. We have the discouragement. We have the sorrow. We have the temptation. We have the peer pressure. But God uses this man as an example, this young man. He overcame because he looked to something beyond here. This morning we talked about, you're going to become a child of God? Colossians the 3rd chapter and verse 1. If you be risen with Christ, set your affections on the things that are above, where Christ sits at the right hand of the Father. Not on the things below, but the things below tempt me. That's right. You set your affection on the things above, not on the things below. But there's so much discouragement. That's right. You set your affection on the things above, not on the things below. In other words, my mind is far above what this world throws at me. And I have to work to keep it that way. Because the devil is trying to chip me down, trying to chip you down, get you and I to succumb to these things. But what Joseph did, in the book of Mark, the 12th chapter, verse 28 and following, the Lord was asked, what's the first and greatest commandment? And he said, this is the greatest commandment. Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, strength, and mind. The second is like unto it, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Do you realize that's Joseph? He loved God. How can I do this great wickedness, sin against God? How can I do this? My master, he trusts me. I can't do that to him. I love him. And in his mind, no doubt, how can I do this to self? How can I do this to you? All of these things are sin. It's wickedness. And so you look, and we have the ability to focus on God, to realize, as Joseph did, there is something beyond. You know, you go back, he was given the promises. He said in a dream, you're going to be a great one. No doubt he knew God's going to use me in great ways. All the time, things happen. Bad things happen. Did he say, oh, forget that? No. He kept looking beyond. In Romans the 8th chapter, we find that all things work together for good to them that love God and are called according to his purpose. That doesn't tell me that everything's going to be good. Bad things happen to me, bad things happen to you. Temptations come and they get strong. For me, for you. Discouragements happen, sorrows happen. But we look, and like the song goes, I know the Lord will find a way for me. You see, I focus on the things above, not on the things below. The devil wants you and I to be overcome by the sorrows, discouragements, the temptations, the heartache. He says, give in. Just this once. You know, just this once has led to so many things. How many people do you know that have left the church without missing, first of all, just once? How many people do you know that's involved in a sin that's got hold of them without starting it just once? You know, not long after I became a child of God, I've told you this before, I came home. My beloved little boy had put something in the commode, some kind of toy. I get home from work. My wife says, commode's overflowing. Got the water shut off. Okay. So I go in there and I get the water out. I'm undoing the commode. And my wife walked in. Says, time to go to church. It's Wednesday night. I said, surely God is going to understand I got to fix my commode. My wife just kind of looked at me and went on. I think she thought at that time, what do you say to a statement like that? She left. I sit there and I was working on that commode. And I thought, did I really say that? How could I say that? God's going to understand just this once. I wiped off my hands, washed them a little bit, didn't change clothes. I went to church, walked into the Bible class, and I've been thankful for that commode ever since, to show me how foolish I can get. What little thing I can let tempt me to put something before God, and that's exactly what any of these things are. The moment of temptation, if you're a young person sitting in a car on a date, you're home alone. The temptation when you're at work, them telling the jokes and you, well, am I going to laugh or am I going to take a stand? The family saying, well, here it is. It's time to go to church. You're going to stay here with us, aren't you? First time. Don't do it the first time. One of the amazing things you read about Joseph, it wasn't the first time. He didn't do it. He didn't let the discouragement of his family, he didn't let the attempts to destroy him, to sell him, he didn't let the things, the lies, he didn't let the imprisonment, anything else. He kept his mind on God. And what that tells me, I can do that. You can do that. I don't care whether you're the young person, whether you're the old person. Be an example of the believers. We can do it. And we have people like Joseph as an example of that purity to tell us. Yeah, Jack, you can do that too. So tonight, are you that example? Like I said, all the things that happened to him, they happened to us. Joseph is an example of purity. But you know what else? I look out and I see our young folk, and I see so many. They're such amazing examples. Oh, I've seen through the years, I've seen some who faltered and failed. I see those of the middle type age. Amazing examples. I've seen some falter and fail. I see those who are older, those great examples, and I've seen some falter and fail. But you know what makes it all worthwhile? Whenever you see those who falter and fail, then they look back and they see the other examples that are standing firm. And they say, I can come back. I can turn from this and be a good example once again. But it's a choice we make. Don't get on the pity train. Don't get on the excuse train. Goes fast. It's hard to get off of. Stay on the train of being an example. If you've made that decision to become a child of God, you're a great and wonderful person. You have great abilities to glorify God, to be a light shining. If you haven't made that decision, maybe tonight's the time you do it. And if you faltered and failed, it's time to come back. It's a great way to go. God will be with us. All things can work together for good. Heaven can be our home. If we can help you to make that sure, let's do it as we stand and sing the song of invitation.